Good morning, everybody. On behalf of Loyola University of Chicago, one of the nation's largest Jesuit universities, I want to welcome you to Loyola. I want to extend my appreciation to all of you for your time and commitment to this topic. Your attendance and participation here is reflective of how important this topic is for making sure the justice system moves forward in a more effective and more fair way. Loyola's mission has always been to bring together research, teaching, and service to advance social justice. And one of the things that Loyola has recently done as part of its new strategic plan is to create a new center for criminal justice research, policy, and practice. The goal of that center is to bring together these missions of the university with respect to research, teaching, and service, but to focus it specifically on the issues of violence, crime, and justice system fairness and effectiveness in the Chicagoland area. Drawing on the large and diverse resources of the university, this center seeks to bring together the disparate fields of medicine, social work, the social sciences, and law to focus on improving justice system effectiveness in the Chicagoland area. Together with my co-director of this new center, Diane Garrity from the Law Center, we look forward to opportunities like this to collaborate with community organizations, governmental agencies, and other universities to really bring to bear on this problem of crime and violence what we have to offer in terms of scientific knowledge and empirical evidence on how to move the system forward more effectively. So again, I appreciate your attendance here. If you have any questions about the amenities here, if you need any information or support for your work here, feel free to ask me. We also have some information about the center available at the table, a little brochure, so when you have some time, look through that. And if you want to collaborate with us, please feel free to reach out to either myself, Diane Garrity, or Lisa Jacobs, who is here. She's the manager of the center here at Loyola. So thank you for being here, and now I'll turn it over to John Mackey for a couple other introductory remarks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Mackey, and I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, which is the state's research and criminal justice grant-making agency. I first want to thank Dave Olson, Lisa Jacobs from the Center for hosting us. I want to thank Adler University for helping us put together, Dr. Alana Quintana. I want to echo Dave and thank all you all for being here, and I want to thank my agency's research unit, led by Dr. Megan Alden over here, for really putting together this phenomenal event. One of the kind of interesting perks about a job like this is you often get to take credit for things you have nothing to do with, and this is certainly the case for today. And I really wanted to say a few words and then get out of the way and learn. But I think I wanted to try to put this into a kind of context, at least for myself and maybe for all of you. In Illinois, like states across the country, we've woken up to the fact that we are radically over-incarcerating people. And I think part of over-incarceration, mass incarceration, is not just the simple fact that the United States incarcerates more people for longer periods of time than any other country in the world. But it's also that we've incarcerated our thinking. We've caged our thinking. And by that I mean the criminal justice system has had to deal with very, very serious problems. And while thinking about criminal justice in terms of victims and perpetrators is really important, accountability is really important, that's the only way in which we see harm. That's the only way in which we kind of think about human suffering. We're missing something really important. And that's what I think this workshop today and the general kind of frame that trauma helps us think about crime is essential. The research is really clear. Anyone who's been in this field knows that most offenders, most perpetrators, especially the most serious ones, begin their lives not in the womb as people who do harm, but they begin their lives as victims, as people who've experienced serious suffering. And I think that's what trauma-informed means. It's helping us think about the social and psychological context in which crime occurs, so ultimately we can produce better results. So I'm really excited for today, and I'm especially excited to hear from our keynote speaker, who I think I'm going to introduce. Jessica? Okay. Eddie Bocanegra. I think his bio is in here, so I'm not going to His bio is amazing. He's a person who's really kind of lived this life in terms of experiencing everything that this work's about, but brings a certain kind of wisdom and kind of reflection to it, which is really rare and profound. So, Eddie?
So I have to agree with John as well in terms of taking credit for the works of others. I often tell my staff, your job is to make me look good. So when I have opportunities to be on a platform and share about our work, I take their credit, right? So that being said, I want to thank John and Dave and Jessica and those who've been involved to kind of get this event together. Because without the support and enthusiasm behind this, obviously we wouldn't have been convening this. But I think more importantly, I just want to thank each one of you for being here because I see some familiar faces that I often see throughout the years in terms of the trenches of fighting these issues. But also I see a few new faces, so it's always good because I'm always in the business of getting to know other people as well and to learn about what inspired them to do this type of work. Now, my purpose today is to share my perspective on an issue that is not just close to my heart, but also in terms of my own work. It is to talk about hope and resiliency at a time in which our country is struggling with supporting healthy and thriving communities. Now, the title of this presentation, Sparks Among the Stubble, Building Resiliency Among Trauma Survivors. It is to highlight the strength in the face of adversity and hope in the midst of despair. And I'm going to see how I could go from... Oh, great. So, something that's already in the bio, but something I want to highlight, and not to brag, I say this with a lot of humility, but there's a purpose why I say this and why I like starting my talk this way. So I have the privilege of being the executive director of the YMCA of Metro Chicago for the Youth Safety and Violence Prevention. And I take some pride in knowing that I started off with a $500,000 deficit, and now we're about a $1.3 million program. And more recently, we were at the Lighthouse highlighting some of our trauma-informed programs, which I'll share in just a moment. In addition to that, I'm also a proud member of two boards, one of Community Renewal Society, so the oldest social justice organization in the state of Illinois, and the other one is the the Juvenile Justice Initiative, working on juvenile issues on a policy level. I also am very extremely proud of being an alumni from the University of Chicago, from the School of Social Service Administration, and it's also giving me the credentials that I need to be able to highlight not just based on my own personal experience, but also using research to support the work that I'm doing as well, and be able to talk that language, which is quite often important. But there's also something that I'm extremely proud of. I'm proud of being a homeowner. I'm proud of being married to a beautiful woman, Catherine Bocanegra, who is in the same field, and who some of you might already know. But I'm also proud, and hopefully I get to work. Where do I point this at? While we're trying to figure it out, the thing that I'm most proud of is actually being a parent. Being a parent of three beautiful little girls. I have a set of twins who are about 15 months old, and this morning I woke up to smell of poop, so I had to change their diaper at 5:30 in the morning. But I also have a 3-year-old who yesterday I ended up putting a car seat belt in the back seat of my old classic Bel Air that I have that I'm still restoring, and taking her for a drive. And so I say that because that is the most of what I'm proud of that I've been able to actually accomplish in my life. But there's something that I want to add to that. That despite of my accomplishments, despite of the fact that I'm a proud father, all these accomplishments will always be cast within the light of the worst mistake that I've done. And so as we're thinking about these issues and we're thinking about trauma, today. I wonder about all those, and in many cases I've had conversations with leaders who have experienced incarceration or have a felony conviction, and the concerns and the struggles they actually have within their context of their work, but also in terms of reintegration, and just to be able to live a normal life. I'm taking a cheap moment right now just to be able to showcase my girls. But like I said, I'm really, really proud of them. But going back to what I was saying is that despite of these accomplishments that I have, despite of, coming home looking forward to, being with my girls and changing dirty diapers and all these wonderful things that I enjoy about being a father, I always wonder what's going to happen when they're of age, where they can understand some of the mistakes that I've done in my life. And when they're going to school and maybe their friends bring that up, because now everything, all information you can find through Google. And I question how am I going to answer those questions? And I question whether or not using my life in a way that has been very transparent and very open to the public, will that at some point in life come back and bite me? And so, part of my talk today is really about that particular issue with people that are coming back home from prison. People who are really trying to become fathers or are fathers. And what does that really mean? I think to give some context to this, I also want to share a quick story. And it's a story that maybe a couple of you in this room have heard. It's called a baseball story. I grew up in a little village, and like many of the kids that I served within the YMCA, they come from that community as well. And other communities very similar, like South Chicago and Humboldt Park and Garfield. And the story is about a 13-year-old kid who was really into baseball, and both his parents were in his life, and he was forced through violence. He was really into domestic violence at home, and then school bullying, and there was some street violence, but really a lot of it just became he became somewhat numb to it because you would see it and didn't think much of it because it didn't directly impact him, so he thought. And at 13, one day this kid was walking to a park called Petrovsky Park. It's on 31st and Keeler. And as he's walking through the park about a mile and a half away from his house, he comes across this intersection. The intersection is Longdale Avenue. Now, for those who know the community, Longdale actually is an imaginary borderline between two major factions. You have the Yankees on one side, and you have the Tuskers on the other side, who historically for the last 50 years have been pretty much killing each other. And as this kid is approaching the intersection, he sees a young man, maybe between the ages of 17, 19, running across him just a few yards. And right behind him, he sees another two young men. One actually stood in the corner while the other man was running right behind him. The other young man had a gun on him. And they both disappeared, and within about a second or two, all you heard was boom, boom, boom. There were several shots. Then he saw the young man that was running behind him with the gun run back where his friend was waiting for him, and they both ran across the school courtyard. The school called Gary Elementary School has been over there, been there for over 100 years. And the two kids pretty much ran across the courtyard and disappeared. And this 13-year-old kid, as he was approaching the intersection, saw this body on the ground, face down, and like what you might see in movies, there isn't a huge puddle of blood. Really wasn't much of that. The body was still fidgeting. And as he approaches the body, he's looking around as to assume the police was be around the corner. And he continues to look around, and he sees neighbors kind of stepping out their front steps, and momentarily they're looking. Nobody approaches him. People are looking out of their windows, and you see the curtains opening up, and nobody again approaching him. Cars stop on the intersection, and they drive around, and they take off. And granted, this is at 4:30 in the afternoon. And so this kid is looking at this body, and then what might have seemed, 5 minutes in real time For him, it felt like it was maybe half an hour, and he looked at his clock and realized he's being late to his baseball game. So he runs across the same courtyard and he saw these two men run. He gets to the park, and the minute he gets to the park, he tells his friend, "Yo, check it out, man, I saw this dude get blasted, he got blown." And his peers, his friends are telling him, "Well, who was he?" And he's like, "I don't know." "What game was he from?" "I don't know." And shortly he started, the game started, he had to pitch the game, and game ended, and the baseball coach approached him and told him, "Hey, do you want to ride back home?" So he did. On the way back home, there was no conversation about what he just witnessed. And when he got home, there was no conversation about with his parents about what he witnessed as well. The following week when he went to school, guess what? No conversation. No counselors, no teachers. He never brought it up. The following year, the 13-year-old kid, who's now 14, decides to join the gang. And for two main reasons, from my understanding. One, around identity. And the other one was really about protection. Believe it or not, some of our kids who join the gangs do it for protecting themselves and sometimes their siblings and loved ones. This kid was in and out, police station, detention, county jail. Then about 6 years later, he actually meets the person who 6 years ago shot and killed a young man. And he didn't meet him in a setting like this, didn't meet him in church or school. He met him in prison. And not while visiting him or visiting someone else. He met him there because the 13-year-old kid was sentenced to 29 years for first-degree gang-related murder. That 13-year-old kid is me. So when John shared in the beginning about my experience around these issues, let me just share that my experience is informed by the fact that I did 14 plus years in prison. 14 years, 3 months, 5,200 days. 2 years in segregation, off and on. About 2 years in maximum prison. And a lot of the time, confined at what we call 18 hours in your cell, and about 6 hours of movement. Also, my perspective, as I mentioned, is informed by the fact that I sit on these boards and as an executive director, as a person who created several programs, as someone with a master's from UFC, I'm able to share maybe a different perspective. And I think there's so many ways that we could deconstruct the story. We could talk about the ripple effect that violence has on the community. We could talk about not only the impact that it had in William's case, who was 18 years old, 2 weeks out of prison, came from a single parent whose family moved weeks before ended up taking his life. We could talk about the ripple effect that it had in my own family. How 3 months after being in the county jail, my family pretty much sold our house, paid for my lawyer, packed up, and went to Texas. And they've been there ever since. We could talk about how the community responded to this issue. We could talk about policies and why back then I was sentenced 29 years and I served only 14 years and 3 months. Versus now when we sentenced 29 years, we do 29 years. There's so many things that we could talk about. I think where I want to spend a little bit of time is I was 18 years old when I went to the county, 19 when I was found guilty or plea bargain and went to the state prison. And we could talk about a little bit about what that transition was like for me as a young kid who was about 135 pounds, being in a place where you had individuals that were serving natural life, people in death row, people that were 2 or 3 times as big as I was. And we could even talk about how I actually navigated through some of those challenges and avoided catching cases in it. Because most people, most young men who go in with the amount of time that I came in at that time, for the type of case that I had, and because of my gang affiliation, we were prone to actually catch more cases in there. There was extreme challenges while in prison. There was separation from home, from family. There was a sense of abandonment. There was lack of opportunity. There was maladaptive coping behaviors that I had to learn. And some of it, I still kind of carry with me. Some of it, I actually have my staff, and Meg was actually here, the back was actually a Loyola graduate as well, who I actually asked her to hold me accountable, but also to support me in ways that not many people actually know. And that's kind of the stuff that I want to share today, given our topic around trauma. When I came home, let me just say there was definitely a lot of support around family. My brothers who were in the military, they had savings for me. When I was in prison, I opened up a savings account. I invested some money in some mutual funds to my brother. So I came home. I didn't have to worry about bills, and I ended up moving my cousin who was a nurse. So I had that sense of support. I had aunts and uncles, some friends from high school. What I didn't have was a plan in terms, I knew that I wanted to go to school. I just didn't know how. I knew I wanted to volunteer. I didn't know how. I didn't know where. And when I would approach my parole officer about these things that I wanted to do, I got very little, if none, no support at all. In fact, part of my transitional plan was to seek mental health services. I had to seek evaluation. And for those who don't know, and sometimes I know that we think that policies are often enforced and executed in the way that we would wish to. There's a lot of good intentions behind some of them. But the challenge for me is that if I didn't seek a mental health assessment, I would go back into prison. And I went to about 8 or 9 mental health service providers, and I asked them, can you do an evaluation? And many of them like, sure. And then I would give them this form, and I answered and fill this form. I'm on parole, Department of Corrections in Illinois. And the minute I would say that, oh, I'm sorry, we can't do this. And I couldn't understand then why. I know now why, and it's liability issues and a whole bunch of other things that I'm not going to get into right now. But at the time, I was like, if I don't get this evaluation, I'm going to violate my parole. So my parole officer, after 6-7 months of pleading with him, telling him, like, listen, here's where I'm going, you can follow up. He gave me this phone number and address of the therapist he was working with and who he knew. And it's actually just a few blocks from here. And I went to go see her, and it was a very stale environment, and I was like, sure, here's my $50. I need to do the study or this evaluation. She did, and then when I tried to get my results back, I couldn't get them. And every time that my parole officer would put pressure, I couldn't get my paperwork. And I would tell him I can't get it because she's not responding back. So I was calling her, and I would go to her office, and I would leave post-it notes on her door. So she'd call my parole officer and said I was harassing her. And guess what happened after that? My parole officer calls me into his car. He comes in a one-way, parks in front of my house, make it obvious for my neighbors, and preaches and gives me the lecture about he's going to incarcerate me and why did I do this to his friend and so forth. So he wanted me to apologize. And I couldn't understand why. What did I do so wrong? And that was some of the challenges. One challenge with our parole system. What does real support look like there? Because of the dozens of friends that I know that come home from prison, not one parole officer has been really helpful. Not with employment, not with mental health services. And I can definitely give you a list of some of the parole officers. Now I mentioned about parole officers coming in a one-way street. Second day that I was home, my family was from out of town, they're at the house. They were celebrating, I'm spending time with the family. Second day, parole officer double parks, or he's in a one-way street. my block. Again, making it extremely obvious to my neighbors who had no idea that my cousin who lived in a very nice, affluent community, it's extremely obvious now that there was a parolee that was living in his house. Then I had to register with the city because of my case. And so here I am in the backseat of a car, and just when I thought that I was regaining some of my dignity upon my release, I realized no such thing. There is no dignity. And it's something that many people who go through the penal institution actually are stripped away from and have an extreme hard time in regaining some of that back. A couple of days after being at my cousin's house, my nephews being there was this noise, little kids running around, and I was extremely joyful. But there was a moment where I ended up going to my room and I started crying. And my cousin noticed that. He came to my room and said, "Eddie, what's wrong?" And I was like, "I don't know what's going on, but something's not right." And he's like, "What do you mean?" My grandpa's a nurse, so he kind of understands some of his issues. And I told him, "I'm supposed to love my cousins, my nephews, and play with them, but right now I just feel like punching them." And he's like, "Why?" And I was like, "That's exactly, I don't know why. I can't make sense of this." So his rationale behind it is like, "Eddie, you've been away all this time. You don't know the noise of kids." I was like, damn, he's right. There's so many other things that I could share about my transition from home. So many things that I continue to grapple with vicariously when a lot of my kids are abused either by police or other people, family members or other gang members. It triggers some things in me. And it takes me to these really dark places. Now, luckily, I'm able to understand these red flags. I'm able to process them. My wife's a therapist, so I'm able to decompress with her. And I have other colleagues that I could talk about these issues. But I'm still grappling with that. And it's funny because, as I mentioned just a moment ago, with regards to maladaptive coping behaviors, things that I had learned in prison that kept me safe, that helped me navigate through some systems there, are not necessarily functional habits on the outside world. And I share that because, again, there's many people who are returning back from prison who I've spoken to who face those challenges. And I'm hoping that today, as Elena talks about the ACEs study and the research that we presented today, that we could tie some of these things. Because how wonderful would it have been if there was good support systems for myself upon release, but also for my family. Imagine 14 years and here I am rolling to my cousin's house who has no idea how to receive somebody like myself. Now, luckily I had a support system and he was educated. But what about those others who don't have the luxury? What about that for others who unfortunately, because of geographic locations and zip codes, it's not that they were born into bad parents. It's because of the community they were born into. Imagine your own kids, your own siblings. Imagine what things would have been like if you wouldn't have been born the way you were born at. If you would have been born maybe somewhere like in Inglewood or Garfield or Austin, a little village. What is the likelihood of your kids or yourself succeeding? Some of us in life have a head start. We're one or two steps ahead. Some of us are still trending behind. There's one thing that I really want to highlight today is that you see me up here and I'm able to share about the work that I do, my experience. But I think that it's time for us to take a very different approach to addressing our mental health with those who are being released from prison or those who are continuously traumatized by their experiences. I have one program that at some other point I'll share more about because I know we're on a time constraint, but one of them is called Urban Warriors, and it brings United States combat veterans together with who we've identified to be the most at-risk youth or kids who experiences those higher ages. And we connect on based on shared experiences, each other's trauma, each other's PTSD. And some of our veterans are continuing to grapple with this, but being part of this program has been very cathartic for them. And for other veterans who've been able to navigate and understand the systems, are able to share that with a lot of our kids. So it's mutually beneficial for both groups. And I know that I'm pretty much out of time. I just want to spend one last minute. And I want to highlight just a few people. Every single person that you see in this slide are people who are doing some amazing work on a national and a local level. People who have gotten their master's degrees, people who are working on their PhD. And often when you first meet them, you would never guess they've been in prison. You've never guessed they've done 10, 15, 20 years. And so the challenge that I leave here today, I know that I'm preaching to the choir right now, is as we work on these issues and policies and how to better understand and how to better receive and how to address these issues with mass incarceration, is that what does it look like for our institutions to hire individuals like myself, to hire the individuals that you see in this slide? Because when we talk about diversity and inclusion, what does that really mean? What does opportunity really mean to each one of us here? I am so glad that our CEO at the YCA bent our policies to be able to hire me. And it's funny because I applied for several jobs, Walgreens, Motorola, not even an interview, not even a callback. So I never had the opportunity to say that I spoke at the United Nations, that I've been invited by the U.S. Embassy to other countries, that I've started different programs. I was denied that opportunity. And so again, what I leave here behind is that as we're talking about mental health and trauma, I think there is nothing more cathartic to helping people than finding opportunity and finding meaning in their lives and finding meaning in the suffering, as John pointed out so graciously just a moment ago. And I would say that the key to change really begins with the way that we share these stories. I am in the business of challenging the narrative and reshaping that. How do we talk about ex-offenders? How do we talk about returning citizens? How do we talk about survivors of trauma? In a way where it is echoed beyond this room. Because again, I know that I'm preaching to the choir. So I just want to thank you for this time. I appreciate it. There is no better feeling than to be able to share my experience, but also, as some of the people in this slide have mentioned before, Eddie, you speak for us in many ways that others can't. And you sit in panels and boards, and you're in different places, and you represent this population, which often we're excluded from. So thank you.
Okay, now we'll hear from Elena Quintana, Executive Director from the Institute on Public Safety and Social Justice at Aspen University. She's going to talk about what is trauma, PTSD, and causes and symptoms.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I'm going to dive right in, and as usual, Eddie makes it difficult for me to follow him. I want to talk just a little bit. There's a lot of terms around trauma and toxic stress and PTSD, and I just want to take a second to give some definitions that I'll be using today. So So I think of trauma, and I took them in very simple terms, just bad things that happen to people, causing a sense of distress and disorientation. It can be catastrophic. If one catastrophic event, it can be episodic or reoccurring. And toxic stress, there's a nice picture here, are the long-term things that tend to go on, which are accumulated burdens of family economic hardship without adequate support. You could see like all of the things that this baby might be born into. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental health diagnosis whose origins are in experiencing or witnessing one or a series of really horrible things. And symptoms are really unrelenting. Flashbacks, nightmare, anxiety, uncontrollable thoughts about the event. And treatment for this, people wonder about different kinds of treatment. There's anything from support groups to medication, meditation, biofeedback, cognitive behavioral therapy, light therapy, trauma reenactment. All of those things have been designed one way or another, and people may be aware of even other therapies that I haven't mentioned here. And I want to make the point that maybe most of the people suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder do not have access to any of these therapies. And I think that that's an important point. Eddie mentioned that I've been talking about adverse childhood experiences. I guess I'm very predictable. This is a study that many of you have already heard about. Eddie Letkick from Health and Medicine makes it her entire business to talk about ACEs. There's two doctors, Felitti and Anda, who basically discovered that after 7,000 people, that when difficulties that we encounter in childhood happen, that basically they are consistent predictors of health disparities. And that childhood trauma, particularly followed by trauma as an adult, can be common, powerful, and intergenerational predictors of disease and dysfunction. They studied this by following 3 categories of abuse: psychological, physical, and sexual, 2 categories of neglect, emotional and physical, and then 5 categories of household dysfunction, like you can see there, substance abuse, loss of biological parents before the age of 18, depression or mental illness in the home, witnessing your mother being treated violently, or having criminal activity in the house so severe that somebody in your home is in prison. They did this study, as you might, I don't know if many of you know, but it's mostly on a middle class, mostly white, mostly college-educated population from San Diego, California. It has since been replicated by the behaviorist factor and surveillance study data in 21 states across the nation, and they found pretty similar commonalities in terms of, just lots of people experiencing all of these ACEs. And they tend to go in travel impacts. So basically, 2/3 of us, most of us have experienced at least one adverse childhood experience. If one is present, there's an 87% chance that there will be more than one, and a 50% chance that there will be 3 or more. For people that, for example, have an alcoholic parent, that doesn't tend to be the only thing that's going wrong. There could be other things that kind of go with that. Likewise for all the other ages. And for some reason in the study, women are 50% more likely to have scores greater than 5. So there's lots of ways that these can manifest, but they can be internalized, they can be externalized, but they have this logic model. In the bottom is the historical trauma, we'll talk about that in a second, which is just kind of the situation that you're born into. And then bad things happen, you start to adjust for them and adapt for them, which oftentimes leads to negative coping strategies, which leads to disease, disability, and social problems, which in turn leads to early death. So that people with 6 ACEs on average die 20 years sooner than people with 0. As you can imagine, in criminal justice population, it's very common for people to have lots and lots of ACEs. There's lots of health disparities that are correlated with ACEs, and actually, a reporter who is like ACE guru was here recently. How many people saw her when she was in town? A couple of people, yes, lucky people. Well, anyway, she was a fantastic speaker. She comes back into town. Should definitely make it a business to see her. This is her graph from ACE Interface, and basically, she says that this study has passed all of the criteria to be considered causal, that these effects, or the ACEs are causal. And so these are just a small sampling of some of the problems that the population attributable risk caused by ACEs, like 65% of alcoholism, 45% of drinking and driving, 31% of current smoking, 42% of marijuana use, 61% of adult incarceration. It goes on, and you can just see, like, just for example, if you have 0 ACEs, you have about a 1.5% lifetime chance of ever trying to commit suicide. Whereas if you have 4 or more ACEs, you have about a 1 in 5 chance of trying to commit suicide sometime in your life. So you see, like, these exponential jumps in terms of the risk that you can attribute to ACEs. There is Dr. Roy Wade, who researched this, what he calls urban ACEs in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is much more similar to the population in Chicago, and surveyed a younger population with an age of 34 versus 56, which was in the original study, and added another 5 ACEs to urban ACEs. And they included experiencing racism, witnessing violence, living in an unsafe neighborhood, being placed in foster care, and experiencing bullying. And additionally, some of the other ACEs were different. As opposed to loss of a biological parent, it could be just growing up in a single-family home. I want you to think about how many people that are court involved and involved in the criminal justice system have experienced these ACEs. So ACEs and post-traumatic stress disorder are linked in that the more ACEs that you have, the more likely you are to develop post-traumatic stress disorder with or without an added adult trauma. But actually, the more ACEs you have, it actually increases the likelihood that you will continue to be exposed to adult trauma. It's not like, the protective factors suddenly kick in. Marginalization, I want to think about trauma in a larger way. I want to talk a little bit about historical trauma. And the historical trauma can be loss of homeland, way of life, culture, ability to practice your faith, access to freedom, access to justice, the ability to raise your children. All of these things are things that have happened to groups of people within this country and many countries around the globe that have led to serious crises, and they don't just go away after one generation. I'll also talk about that. There's a Native American scholar, her name is Maria Yellowhorse Breitbart, that defined historical trauma as the collective emotional and psychological injury, both over the lifespan and across generations, resulting from a cataclysmic history that occurs as a result of genocide and other significant abuses. So we can think coming to mind the history of Native Americans within this country. We can think of Holocaust, we can think of slavery. There's many things that we can think of. Internment camps. There's sadly very lots of examples. I have added to this definition that historical trauma continues a legacy of systematic marginalization through current enforcement of policies, practices, and laws that recreate trauma. And I'll tell you why I added this. And you can imagine, based on the picture I added, that I think that current policing practices are an example of this. Nationwide, young people of color are incarcerated far more than their white counterparts. African Americans are arrested are incarcerated at 4.6 times. The rate of white people, Native Americans, 3.3 times more likely, Latinos, 1.7 times more likely. And let me tell you why I think that this doesn't have to be, that there can be healing very quickly. The people that sold their people into slavery for longer than any other civilization in the entire world did not come from Africa or Asia or South America. It was Scotland and Ireland. They sold their people into slavery for a period of -1,000 years. That is a long time. And it actually only ended when African slavery, like when the slave ships started coming over. And in the U.S., we always think of slavery just as an African-American burden. You don't really think about Scottish people as like post-traumatic slave disorder or something. I mean, it's like you don't think about it. I certainly didn't. But when we afford access to opportunity and justice, healing can occur. So when you don't see healing in a population, it's because the harm has not stopped. And I want to give another example of that. So there's this guy, he's a gay researcher. He was working in a mental health clinic in Massachusetts. He wanted to know why the suicide rate for gay men was so high. And so he decided to start a study that was going to be 2 years long. In the middle of the study, 12 months in, Massachusetts became the first state to legalize same-sex marriage. This, although it didn't provide total equality, it did validate gay men and being gay, well, the gay people in general. And basically, what he saw was a natural study that he did not intend that showed that same-sex, like 12 months after the legalization of same-sex marriage, there was a statistically significant decrease in all sorts of factors, including medical care visits, mental health care, mental health costs, also prescription medication. There were all sorts of things that came part and parcel with it. But it didn't matter if the person had happened to get a new partner or anything. It doesn't matter. Just this validation and including people rather than excluding them created wellness. I want to talk a little bit about epigenetics, and I think that it's really important because we think of policy as something that just happens and we need to go along with it. But I want to say that what happens in the world actually is stored within ourselves, within our lived experience, and it ends up affecting further generations. Epigenetics is really what I think of DNA and it's a crack in the human genome and kind of thinking about all of our genes. Well, what's interesting is, your brain cells and your liver cells are the exact same cells. But what makes the brain cell function like a brain cell and the liver cell function like a liver cell is the epigenetic code, which basically is a complex series of chemicals and epigenetic factors that either read code, which is these are called histones, and this is the code which unfurls so that it can be read, or recoils so that it can't be read. And there's all these little histone tails. They have these things called telomeres on them. And epigenetic factors can link to those and can create things like cancer, autoimmune disease, mental health disorders, diabetes. So I think that our lived experience is incredibly important. So when we think about policy, it actually affects us at a cellular level and can for generations. So let me tell you what I mean. Here's some epigenetic studies, and I think that these are some things that we learned from rats that we can apply to ourselves. There's this kind of rat called the agouti mice. Well, they're mice. They're mice in these studies. And so on the left-hand side, there's this mouse that's born very big and yellow, and it tends to get diabetes and die early. Just changing its diet to interrupt the epigenetic factors from linking onto the histones in one generation created mice that look very different. So this is its baby, a little pup that is healthy, that is smaller, that's brown in appearance, and that lives a normal lifespan, and that passed those traits on to its own pups. Additionally, there's the cherry blossom study, which is very famous, where they wafted in cherry blossom scent to a bunch of mice and then shocked them. those mice would pile up and tremble in a corner. And what happened was, later, after they stopped the studies, those mice were then bred and had pups of their own that were raised in another lab. And when the cherry smell was wafted in, guess what the pups would do? They would tremble, even though they themselves were never exposed to the cherry blossom scent. When the cherry blossom scent was wafted in, they were warned through their own genetics, their epigenetics, that cherry blossom smell is very dangerous, right? I'll give you the third study. There's two kinds of, this is a rat study, where there were rats that were looking their newborns, and they were like really caring for them carefully, and they found that rats that, licked more and cared more for their little pups, that in those pups, they startled less easily, they were able to navigate life more easily, they just kind of surfed the waves of life better than the rats that had been neglected, that were not groomed, and these rats ended up being very startled nervously, and they had less developed memory centers and a lot more stress throughout their bodies when change would come. So I want you to think about how we treat people that are very, very vulnerable, and do we nurture them, or do we put them in solitary confinement? So in terms of epigenetics and psychology, I want to just send this out to you that, our lived experiences, nature and nurture, are really constructing as we live. Like everything we do is basically going, a part of our genes expressing themselves and dictating how our genes will express themselves for this generation and for future generations, right? So that I think that that's very powerful. And my thought question is, if we can be warned and shaped by negative experiences intergenerationally, can we also be healed? What might intergenerationally fostering healing look like? And what would it look like in the criminal justice system, where there are so many very challenged people? I don't think it's any news to people in this room that there are more people who need mental health services that are locked up in prison than receiving mental health services in hospitals. And for the vast majority of people that need mental health services that are in crisis, the only democratically available option for them, readily available option for them, affordable available option for them is often arrest or detention. The problem with this is that corrections is not the place to heal people, right? So police officers and correction officers often have experienced incredible toxic stress, and then they have a lot of difficulty seeking help and support when they need it. I found this little picture on the web. Outnumbered 201, no gun, no baton, and they all hate me. How was your day? That leads to very high rates of suicide and PTSD. In fact, corrections officers are, in this Spinaris study, 34% of corrections officers have PTSD symptoms active, which is more than twice the rate of returning veterans. And who are they dealing with? And so we're having very traumatized people with not a lot of ways to deal with their trauma, working with other people that are incredibly traumatized as well. So what does it look like to address rather than recreate trauma? Our criminal justice system would look just very different if we prioritize healing and help for those who cause and suffer victimization, as well as all system players. And trauma-informed care really is an empathic orientation that doesn't put people out on an ISO or in solitary, but really understands that they need more help, support, and resources. And it really changes the conversation from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And then what can we do about that? I want to give an example of one trauma-informed approach where there was, this was on the Washington, a corrections officer who was very good at knowing all about trauma-informed approaches, and he basically saw a guy who was crushing up and snorting a pill in the day reporting center. And he was very calmly went up to him, leaned down, got at eye level, de-escalated him, and just said, "Hey, what are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm just snorting my medication because it's easier than swallowing it." I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to have to get that, I'm going to have to test that substance, but why don't you come talk to me in private in my office?" And then he figured that, like a lot of people that are in the criminal justice system, that he had an auditory cortex that was probably about 10% smaller than many people, and that it might be difficult for him to be confronted. And so he'd also figured that he was triggered if he was busy taking drugs in the middle of the day reporting center. So he de-escalated the approach. When they tested the substance, they found out it was cocaine. He was then, the officer said, "I'm going to have to take you in because this test positive for cocaine. I'm sorry you're feeling so badly, and maybe we can talk some more until processing your paperwork." The paperwork was processed. He was detained again. But what was very interesting is this man had done this a number of times, and it was the first time that he had been detained again without hitting, punching anybody. So you see just a little adjustment in information on the part of the corrections officer made for an enormous systemic difference for everybody who's involved. The examples of healing community really rely upon positive human connection and emotional safety, as well as really thinking about how to include people even though they might have very severe trauma symptoms. I also think that restorative justice is incredibly promising and has shown a lot of healing and promise. This is a picture from a restorative justice project that they did in Rwanda, that even in a situation where there was somebody was killed, this woman said, "He killed my father and 3 brothers. He did these killings with other people, but he came along to me and asked for pardon. He and a group of other offenders who had been in prison helped me build a house with a covered roof. I was afraid of him, and now I've granted him pardon, and things have become normal, and in my mind I feel clear." I put this in here because having an ability to actually interact and be accountable to your community is incredibly healing, and it really addresses a lot of post-traumatic distress. And as you can imagine, this isn't a lightweight crime. I want to go to this because I know I have to leave. This is about how to make healing communities, and I want to leave you all with the idea that if you're going to make communities healthier, this is also an example from Washington that is like years ahead of us and how to deal with this stuff. But basically, they looked at mental illness in communities that had a high capacity to address mental illness or a low capacity. And what they found is in communities, even if they had, whatever their age score, that basically, even if they were high trauma communities, low trauma communities, whatever, that basically in the high capacity communities, they had much less serious mental illness. The incidence went from 16.1 in low capacity communities to 4.4 in high capacity communities. Or if it's less very serious mental illness. Other mental illness, 22%, 8.2%, and depression, 43%, 28.5%. I just want to talk about how important connection is and understanding, and I'll end with a personal story of a kind of trauma-informed community that I'm a part of. Every month I go to Danville Prison, and basically I'm there so that the inmates that are there can do a trauma-informed support group for each other. It's called the Community Anti-Violence Education Project. And it's once a month. They talk about how trauma triggers learning to control them, helps them learn to control violent outbursts, and helps to ready them for getting parole. And it's a really powerful space. And there have been many times that the prison, for various reasons, has tried to block this from happening. They've tried to block me from getting in. They've tried to block them from going. I mean, it's just been an endless obstacle for us. but everybody sticks with it because it means so much to people. And in fact, at one point, a couple months ago, maybe 4 months ago, the administration said, well, all right, you guys can get either, you can work, you can have your job, which gives you daily movement. So for people who are in their cell between 18 and 23 hours a day, movement's very, very important, right? So you can have a daily job, or you can go to this therapy group once a month. Like, what are you going to choose, right? Well, so they're explaining this to me, and I realized everybody was in their seat. And I thought, I got 15 guys there, right? And I thought, why on earth? Why would you pick this once-a-month thing over a daily job? That's so crazy. Like, I'm sorry you even put in that position. I felt bad for showing up that day, because they just put everything on the line. And they said, this is the only place we feel human. I will end with that. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to have our research panel. First, we're going to start with Art Ruggiero.
Thank you. Welcome. Thanks to the Illinois Criminal Justice Authority. Thanks to Adler University for partnering with us. This is a very important topic. And it's not only important to us as researchers and mental health providers, but as citizens of the city, and many areas in which the residents are beleaguered and besieged and suffering from trauma and spoilers. The preceding presentations were stage-setting for my remarks. Thank you so much for giving us a broad breadth of understandings about trauma and how it affects people's lives. There are many pathways to troubled and troublesome behavior, and most of those pathways are paved with trauma. There are a variety of different avenues to the endpoints of crime and violence and addiction. And those many avenues share some common characteristics or features. That is, the people who travel those avenues come from similar backgrounds, have similar psychological problems, and are predisposed to suffer from those problems because of similar types of pernicious experience that affect their brain development. There are also unique and individual stories to be told on that road. And my colleagues and I have taken both a nomothetic approach, looking for general commonalities and factors shared among people in samples, as well as an idiographic approach in which we take a closer look through case studies, getting a more highly textured view of people's lives, using what's called thick data. And we complement our quantitative analysis with our more qualitative storytelling, narrative-creating analysis. As Dr. Pignata mentioned, there's a preparedness to suffer from trauma. Early and repeated experiences, direct, indirect, or vicarious, create a probability that someone who has been exposed to trauma will experience life-altering events at various intersection points in their encounters with school systems and with juvenile justice systems. Preparedness is the likelihood of suffering that could be looked upon as a Bayesian or a conditional probability. If you're exposed to trauma early in life, if you have school failures, if you live in an environment that is replete with violence and with social disorder, the likelihood that you're going to experience addiction, be involved in crime, and also be a perpetrator and recipient of violence goes way up. But they're conditional probabilities. Genetics is not fate, and nor is environment or their combination. But genetics and experiences increase conditional probabilities that people are going to experience challenges in their adolescence and early adulthood. Interconnectedness. Neuropsychological and behavioral problems are mixed in particular ways and affect one another. I think that's an important message that my fellow psychologist communicated in her presentation, is that it's really hard to unpack the cause of people's behaviors. Is it psychological, is it environmental, or is it neurological? I think all of that, and they interact in complicated and complementary ways. The causal arrow never points in one direction. People's brain injuries affect their emotions and cognitions, which affect their behaviors. Their behaviors then affect their emotions and their thinking, which then alters their brains. Our brains are plastic. From infancy to death, our brains are changing in a variety of ways, and those changing interconnections can contribute to our lives and make us healthier, or they can contribute to our lives and cause distress and dysfunction. But there's a high degree of interconnectedness, and it's very difficult to unpack exactly what causal factor is operating at any critical moment in a person's life. Connected to that is the realization that problems come in packages. From a psychiatric standpoint, we've learned in numerous studies and in my own research that comorbidities are the rule, not the exception. You should expect them. You shouldn't be surprised by them. The problems that my colleagues and I have studied among jail and prison populations all show the multiplicity of challenges that these folks face. It isn't just substance abuse disorders, it's other psychiatric disorders, and it's a variety of problems in living. PTSD and its cognitive problems occur with such regularity that we're starting to think about a subtype of PTSD that involves men who have suffered a variety of different traumas who then act out in violent ways and suffer from substance abuse problems and criminal lifestyle. That could be a particular subtype of people with PTSD, as we have subtype of veterans with PTSD, we have subtype of people who suffered from domestic violence and PTSD, etc. This could be another subtype. Trajectories. Everybody has a life course, everybody has an arc that they follow, and we start projecting our arc pretty early in life. And the road to addiction, crime, and violence, you can get on the ramp ready to go to those problems and have opportunities to get off, and maybe you get back on again. And I'm reminded of a young man, Lee McCollum, who was featured in the documentary Chicago Man, and he went to Fender High School, and he was on the road to crime and violence and addiction. He was a gang member. He was on that road. He had a lot of opportunities for ingress. The principal at Fender gave him opportunities for egress. He got off the road, he got back on it again, and he was shot dead on May 12th of this year. Very tragic loss. A young man who had an opportunity to change his trajectory and his arc because he had people committed to giving him the resources so that he could make healthier and more pro-social decisions. But the pull of the life of the gang was too much for him to overcome. And gangs are gang membership is an unhealthy adjustment to trauma. And from the outside looking in, it looks like the choice to belong to a gang is inexplicable. it's very difficult for us to comprehend why a young man would do that. So from the inside, it seems like a logical choice, given what else is available to young men, to increase their self-esteem, to feel a sense of belongingness, and to have a sense of protection. The social environment creates trauma. As my colleague noted, poverty is stressful. From the earliest epidemiological studies to the most recent research on stress and poverty, it's noted that there's an overrepresentation of people with severe mental illness and addictions in the lowest rungs of the socioeconomic ladder in the United States. And a metaphor that I found quite compelling is that of broken ladders. And people who live in poverty have a really hard time climbing out of it. The rungs of the ladder are pretty weak and easily broken. And they're entrenched in poverty and there are structural impediments. Remember, poor environments are criminogenic, they propel people into criminality, and they're pathogenic. They propel people into mental illness and addiction. And being involved in a lifestyle that encourages hopelessness and helplessness also encourages people to engage in self-destructive and other destructive behaviors. Exposure to street violence and disorder, both social and physical, are traumatic. And people who live in those environments experience them on a regular basis, on a daily basis. You have micro traumas going on all the time in those communities, as well as larger traumas, macro traumas that affect people. This participation in different systems, penetration, for example, in the juvenile justice system can be traumatic. In the foster care system, even in school systems that are not providing to meet kids' emotional and intellectual needs are traumatic. And poor people are more likely to be in systems that are traumatized. I think it's interesting that you can think about an entire community as an entity that's experienced trauma. We have communities in Chicago that have been poor for 60 years. And there's been a variety of obstacles that keep people from moving out of those communities into healthier and more productive lives. Well, historical trauma affects communities as entities and can be cumulative. If you are born into a community that suffered from larger trauma, you are going to be affected by that on a regular basis and find it harder to get out of the lifestyle that creates for you a lot of accumulating deficits. So we're taking a bird's eye view of the individual living in the poor community. We're using the Google map. We're up here. Let's zero in. We zero in a little closer. We get a broader look at the top. We get a more fine-grained look and a closer look as we move in to the family environment, in which there can be abuse, neglect, and abandonment, all in them of themselves, and particularly in combination, highly traumatic experiences. We don't think a lot about parental incarceration being traumatic for children, but it's highly traumatic because having a parent away in prison increases the likelihood for neglect, abuse, and abandonment in the home. The first book to address the collateral damages of incarceration, mass incarceration in the United States, is malign neglect. And one of the chapters of the book discusses the terrible consequences of having a parent incarcerated during the developmental years. That means there's an absence of a role model. That means there's an absence from the community of a young man who is in early adulthood without opportunities because of school failure and employment failure to live a pro-social life. So what you're doing by sending young men to prison is bankrupting their future. It's forestalling opportunities. During the years in which we're developing our career in early adulthood, young men in prison are losing opportunities to develop themselves into pro-social and productive adults. And having an absent parent suffering from abuse, abandonment, and neglect means that you don't have protective factors in your life. You don't have any sense of resiliency. The executive director talked about having some protective factors in his life, having family that was supportive, that will be able to provide him with resources and unconditional love. That can be a game changer. Having even one person in your life who will provide you with that kind of support can change your life, can change your arc, can change your trajectory. Resiliency is very important, and some of it is innate, inborn, temperamental. Most of it, though, is required through learning experiences in childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood. When you think about the young person storing up stock, currency, and capital in childhood, there's not much to put in there. My dad spent his childhood years growing up in poverty, one of 11 children during the Depression. And when I was a little boy, when my son was a little boy, first thing my dad gave us was this piggy bank. And he would bring us a quarter or a $half, said silver dollars, and put them in our piggy bank. What we were doing is amassing capital, real and otherwise, because my dad was loving me, and my son's grandpa was loving him by giving him something to put in a piggy bank. That's real capital, but it's also symbolic capital. Kids growing up in poverty and abusive environments, at home and in traumatic environments in the community, are not getting anything to put in a piggy bank. They're not building up social currency and capital and stock. And that's what we take with us into early adulthood. So I had all of that, and my stock was, I go to private school when I'm a little boy. I have two parents who love me and take care of me. I grow up in an extended family. I see all of the male role models in my life going to work every day and being successful. My dad was a labor leader and participated in the civil rights movement. All that is coming into my piggy bank, and it's taken me into early adulthood, ready for success. Had I grown up in another larger and family environment, I wouldn't have had that capital and that stuff to put in my piggy bank. Let's go now more deeply and look at what happens to the brain. I'm going to be describing this in very blunt and broad ways, but note that this ties into what my colleague talked about earlier and what I alluded to. The brain is plastic. Suffering from trauma in utero affects the brain's development and can put someone on a pathway towards psychological, emotional problems and cognitive deficits. Trauma, addiction, they change the brain. They affect brain development, size of the brain, and most important from understanding behaviors, the brain circuitry. This is a picture of a three-year-old with a normal brain and a brain that has been subjected to extreme neglect. So the brain is normal because the brain is allowed to develop without any perturbations or injuries to it. When a child is neglected, it changes their brain formation, it changes their development, so there's less cortical mass. And that is going to manifest itself in a variety of different kinds of problems, emotional, intellectual, and behavioral. So just imagine that experience actually alter the way in which the brain develops. And we knew this, but we weren't able to visualize it until recently, until the 1990s when we started living brains. But there was a famous study done in the 1920s of kids in orphanages who were taken care of, and they were fed and they were kept warm and they were swaddled and put in cribs. They weren't mistreated, but they weren't held, and they weren't shown any kinds of physical expressions of love, and they didn't grow. They actually didn't grow. It was called the failure to thrive phenomenon. So their bodies were developing physically, but what we didn't know at the time is their brains were also not developing. And because of this lack of development, they had a variety of different setbacks throughout their lives. So neural circuitry is also affected by trauma, and it's also affected by addiction. Addiction, which can be a way to cope with trauma, using drugs and alcohol as a way to dampen the symptoms of trauma, to make you feel less anxious and to also elevate your mood. And the two areas of the brain that are affected by both addiction and trauma, the nucleus accumbens, that's the pleasure area of the brain, that's the fun part of the brain, and the amygdala, which is the seat of emotion and rage, and that's the stormy part of the brain. People who experience PTSD have a hyper-aroused amygdala, and they're also less likely to experience less likely to experience pleasure. So trauma leads to hyperarousal, really hot turning amygdala, and also dampens down the likelihood that people are going to find pleasure in everyday life experiences, and they're going to turn to drugs and alcohol. And drugs and alcohol change the brain. They alter the nucleus accumbens and the amygdala. And most important, when you think about criminal behavior, other aspects of antisocial behavior and dysfunction and distress, we're thinking about the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that governs attention and the behaviors and judgments and emotional responses as well. When the prefrontal cortex is damaged, when the executive function of the brain is affected by trauma and addiction, people make bad choices. People are engaged in risky behaviors. People are more likely to be violent and more likely to put themselves and others in harm's way. We've had a great opportunity to study men in treatment in the jail as well as men in prison, and my colleagues are going to present those findings as well as give an overview of other research that focused on correctional populations, trauma, crime, violence, and addiction.
Thank you, Art. So I'm going to talk about 4 different research studies with criminal justice populations done in Illinois, and the 3 of us, Art and Don, I've had some involvement in all 4 of these. They all measure current PTSD, so that means PTSD at that point in time where we gave out the survey or did the interview, not lifetime. And the study in the upper right-hand corner, we were able to get permission to print it in its entirety, so it's in your packet, your folder. And the one on the bottom right hand corner is also a summary that are both available in your folders. So now we're going to look, I'm not going to go over the slide, but you have that for your reference. I'm going to go over the ones in red are the 4, and kind of put in perspective where the criminal justice populations were experiencing PTSD compared to general populations, RX-7s, and urban examples. So first looking at the jail detainees for women, this is actually something Art did. I wasn't involved in, but I read it. So there are 810 jail detainees, female, who got structured clinical interviews using the DSM-4 to look at prevalence for PTSD, and 13% of the sample, as you can see, were diagnosed with PTSD. So the most common symptoms, 65% reported intrusion or re-experiencing, and 49% reported negative alterations in cognition, mood, arousal, and reactivity. So you can imagine if you're working in the jail with a population having these symptoms, there's some challenges there. So 85% experience the stressors that in the red are qualified as trauma, and that's compared to 70% in the general population. And one really interesting finding that I thought was that Black women were 9 times more likely to report exposure to trauma than white women, and Black women were 16% more likely to report exposure to trauma than Hispanic women. It's interesting that in brief. So, moving on to the jail detainees of men, that was a study the 3 of us did together. That was Loyola, the Authority, and Westcare. So in a sample of 117 men in Cook County Jail who were in the Westcare Substance Abuse Program, we used the PCL, which is the Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Checklist, civilian version, and that's also available in the packet. It measures probable PTSD because a clinician actually makes the diagnosis, but it's evidence-based and it's free and available to the public. And we also use the called the LEC, the Traumatic Life Events Checklist, and that is also available in the folder. So we found, as you can see, 21% were symptomatic for probable PTSD. Some of their symptoms, 48% were super alert, watchful, or on guard, which is also known as hyperarousal. 47% had repeated disturbing memory thoughts or images of a stressful experience in the past. 97% that they had personally experienced at least one traumatic event in their life. And again, compared to the general population, which is about 70%, almost all had happened. Interesting to note from this study how much physical assault they experienced. 80% had experienced physical assault, and in general population, it's about 11%. And then 78% have been assaulted with a weapon. And looking at this one, this is a brand new study, everybody. The Authority did the study again with Westcare. We just went to Sheridan Prison, myself and Sharon Adams, another researcher, in March and April. And just entered all the data last week and analyzed it quickly to find out that 29% of that sample was symptomatic for PTSD. Again, we used the PTL, so that can really be compared to the 21% we found in the jail, the same instrument. A previous study in the 90s of male prisoners found that 21% were also had PTSD. The most common symptoms, 50% were super alert or watchful, 42% had repeated disturbing memories of a stressful experience. So again, people working in prisons, knowing that these are common symptoms for up to 29% of the people they're working with, again, stressful challenges. And then, interesting to note about this study, of those with probable PTSD, they had an average of 6.5 traumatic events in their life, but those who didn't have probable PTSD, they had an average of 6.4. So basically, they're all experiencing lots of trauma. Maybe not at that point we did the interview that they actually could be probably diagnosed with PTSD. And it also speaks to some people are more resilient, and I think we'll get maybe into that a little bit too later. The most common traumatic event was 7 unexpected deaths of someone close, and transportation accidents, and assault with a weapon. So there can be things that are assault and violent, but also things that any of us could experience, like traffic accidents that are really horrible ones. Okay, so going on to the final study, this is a study I was on. It was an Authority study. This is the general population of women in the Illinois Department of Corrections, and 60% were symptomatic PTSD, which is off the charts, way more than the others. 71% said they had repeated disturbing memories, thoughts, or images of a stressful experience, and 71% also said they avoided thinking about or talking about a stressful experience from the past. This study also looked at abuse. So an interesting finding was that women who reported experienced more types of abuse, that is, they had physical, they had sexual, they had intimate partner. They were more likely to have higher PTSD scores, and that was statistically significant. And those who experienced childhood sexual abuse were more likely to have higher scores. So as part of that, the jail study, as Art mentioned, we did case studies. So John and I did these really long hour, 2-hour interviews with 6 of the men in the study who had probable PTSD scores. So I'm just going to talk about one person who we call Victor. He was a 32-year-old Hispanic male. He grew up in Chicago and Puerto Rico. His parents couldn't speak or hear. At age 12, he joined a gang. He observed drug use, homelessness. Twice he attempted suicide. And he was a victim of all different kinds of trauma, sexual abuse, witnessing violence. He had been shot, he had been stabbed, he'd handled 2 dead bodies. And then he had also been in car accidents, the burglary and hurricane, so all kinds of things happened to Victor. So here's a quote from him. I'll read quickly. The first one was, this was a traumatic event where he witnessed his first murder at the age of 9. Okay. The first one was, I think this one traumatized me real bad. It was when I was a kid. I think I was like 8, 9 years old. Me and my mom and stepdad, my little brother and sister were coming from church, and it was nighttime. It was like 9 p.m., and we were parking in the parking lot in the project, and I was on the side of the project, just dragging this lady by her hair. And one of them had a handgun. The other had, like, I think it was an MP1 on him, like before, like a little machine gun. And she was screaming and, fighting with him, but they just dragged her, and the guy that was holding the lady by her hair just put her down and, boom, shot her in the head. I could still see her head just going like this and dropping down. They just walked away like they killed a dog, or something, like nothing was done. So yeah, that was the first time I see somebody killed. So imagine 9 years old, this is just one of many things that happened to him. So at the time of the interview, he was highly symptomatic for PTSD. He noticed decreased intimacy or trust in others, nightmares, he was edgy, anxious, and he said he did use drugs to cope. And now, I'm going to have John Rubik come up from Gateway, formerly with Westcare, when she did deep studies, to give us some policy information, research information.
Hi, good morning. So, like Jessica said, I'm John Rubik, and I am Executive Director at Gateway Foundation. But before coming to Gateway, I spent 8 wonderful years with Westcare. And really what I'm here to talk to y'all today about is research and practice. So we did all these studies and how we're able to actually incorporate them into treatment services. But before I kind of delve into that, I just want to maybe quickly, and I know that we're already past the time, so I'm going to talk really fast and hopefully sensibly and give like 1 minute for questions at the end. But I just want to give kind of an overview of how the study kind of just came to be. So part of my role at Westcare, I was Director of Evaluation, and under that role I would do a lot of group observation. And so I'm slightly embarrassed to admit this now, but I was in group one day and someone had to share a story, and it just hit me like a proverbial light bulb going on over my head that, wow, I bet that guy has PTSD. And then second I bet a lot of these guys have PTSD. So I've never really thought about it before. We always talk about gender-specific services, but in my mind that meant, how are you going to take a program that sometimes is designed for men and make it applicable to women, which of course is incredibly important, but men have special needs too. And so I was thinking, that's something I haven't really thought about in the past. So lucky for me, on 2 fronts is that I used a ton of art, so I had natural allies to go through and discuss these things with. And then also I worked for an agency that really valued research, evaluation, data, and really supported these types of initiatives. So we, as you all know, we did do the study, and let me just see how to get to the next slide. Okay. So we did the study and we realized that this was truly an issue in the treatment program. So we provide, at Westcare they have contracts to provide substance use disorder treatment for in-custody populations. So what we wanted to do was make sure that we were addressing trauma. And so what we did is, now let me just say this isn't something you can enter into willy-nilly. This is something really you have to give a lot of thought to. And what we did is we decided that we were going to screen everybody as part of the intake process. So everyone that came into the jail program was screened. And if they were the criteria of having probable PTSD, their screening was passed to a licensed therapist who would then do a full assessment. If the therapist thought that the client could benefit from being involved in a specialized trauma group, they were offered the opportunity to participate in one. And of course, it's voluntary. No one ever would be forced to participate in something like that. like I said, this has to be a lot of careful consideration has to go into this and how you design this type of program and whether or not it's going to work in your setting. So there's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. So one thing we decided to do is that we wanted to run things as closed groups. A closed group is a group where everybody starts it together and nobody new can enter the group. And why I think that's really important is that it allows for the clients to build a bond with each other where they feel safe sharing. Because somebody new coming in every single week, you kind of have to start over, you might not trust this person. So we give people the opportunity to trust through the group process together. There's just a natural bond that occurs. The downside to a closed group, of course, is that fewer people are actually going to be able to participate in the intervention. So there's just going to be a time constraint where somebody comes in, the group's already started, they're late time in the treatment program, this might not allow them to participate. So that would be something that you have to really consider for yourself. Another thing is you have to look at, do you have staff? Do you have somebody on staff who's able to do this? Because it can't just be anyone. It has to be someone with specific skill sets. You have to think about what kind of curriculum we want to use, what kind of setting. Is it a private room? Are we going to be having institutional support? Will they allow us a 2-hour period to do these types of groups? Dr. Quintana really touched on that earlier where she was talking that there really wasn't huge institutional support at Danville, and that's going to throw up a lot of roadblocks. So you have to really be cognizant of how you can best deliver these services. And finally, what we also at Webster had done was evaluated the group. So it was really important to us that we included a pre-post measure to see that is the intervention having the intended effect? Or are people feeling better? Are they able to manage their symptoms more positively? Do they feel like they have the skills now that they maybe didn't have before? And also give them the chance to provide feedback. So do they like the group? Do they feel like they benefit from it? What would they like to see different? What do they think works? So having this constant feedback loop where you're actually taking into consideration what the client's done, I think is crucial. And then also checking to make sure that the clients are actually getting better as a chance by participating in this. So we did come up with some recommendations, given the high prevalence of trauma, and again, I know we've already touched on this a little bit, so we really recommended that trauma-informed care should be the standard of care for everybody. Also, given the high interrelatedness of PTSD, trauma exposure, substance use disorders, and criminal activity, that programs that are able should provide trauma interventions if it's possible in their environment. They should also, at a minimum, provide referrals or assessment where it's possible. Now, really quickly, I just wanted to kind of sidetrack into the difference between trauma-informed care and trauma intervention. These terms are often used synonymously, but they are not the same thing. So trauma-informed care is more of an approach or framework, and again, we have touched on this a little bit, but it's really coming from a place to assume everybody in your program has trauma. So even if you're not doing a screening, if you're not checking for it at all, just assuming every single person we're coming into contact has a trauma background. So how are we going to design our program so that we are creating as safe of a space as possible and minimizing triggers as much as possible? Now, in a correctional institution environment, that's inherently challenging because there's a lot of practices that are necessary, but there are also triggers. So things like a lot of people on site, cell doors, loud noises, hat searches, so on and so forth, shackles. But we can develop programs that, are not saying names, that we don't scream at people. I think we had some really good headaches with a correctional officer that was very calm, having a routine. There are things that we can do to try to minimize the triggers. A trauma intervention, on the other hand, is an actual delivery of a service or some type of curriculum or manual where you're actually trying to address the trauma. So you can have a trauma-informed program and yet not offer a trauma intervention or vice versa, and you may have both. Again, not every program will be able to provide trauma intervention, but every program could be trauma-informed, and it's our suggestion that every program is. So some quickly final thoughts is that given the high relatedness of all these, criminal activity, substance use, trauma, PTSD, is that we really want to work with clients so that they can acquire coping strategies so that they can maintain life sobriety and healthy ways to deal with trauma once they're released. Also, I think it was something important to bring up is that, especially in jail settings or community corrections, that when somebody comes to our house and they've been using alcohol or drugs to manage the trauma symptoms, suddenly that's taken away, you might see these things really manifesting themselves. We would, I'm sure oftentimes these people are labeled as being very difficult clients. Another way to frame it is that perhaps they were just using survival strategies that helped them to live and to cope. Now they took those away. This is a person that's dealing with these feelings. So just trying to be really kind to them again, what people's experiences are and how we're going to treat them. So we did talk a lot about the H study already, but I think this is such a beautiful, insightful quote by Dr. Falaji, who is one of the primary authors on that. And he said, "My hearing psychoactive effects do the best coping device that an individual can find. Is IV drug use properly viewed as a personal solution to problems that are well concealed by social entities and taboos? Is drug abuse self-destructive, or is it a desperate attempt at self-healing?" So we left you with some resources as well as some references, and I'm not sure if there's time for questions or not. 1 minute for questions. Okay, so if there are any questions, we'd be happy to entertain them.
So, hi, I'm Becky Levin. I am from Anna and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago, where I direct the Strengthening Survival Youth, or SKY program. So you can be honest with me, how many of you, when you looked at the agenda, thought it was a little weird that someone from the Children's Hospital was moderating this session about PTSD in the corrections population? Anyone think it was a little weird? It's fine, if you can admit it, it's okay, I get this all the time. But I think that it's relevant for a couple of reasons. First of all, despite what the law says, we know that youth does not end at age 18, right? So we heard a couple of our speakers talk a lot about the brain. And we also know that brain development doesn't finish until maybe about age 25. If you know some of my friends, maybe until age 40. But we also know that people involved in corrections are removed from their homes, their families, their children. We know that they won't go back to their homes, their families and children, so it has a lot of impact on children. But we're also going to, right now, with this panel, think about how you take all this research and turn it into practice. And I think there's no place that does that better, probably, than a hospital, right? I don't do anything clinically, but if you think about what a hospital does, they take all of this research about medicine and use it to provide care to people. So I think there's a lot we can learn from that. So each of our panelists is going to spend a few minutes talking about their work or reflecting on trauma and the population involved in corrections for our two new panelists of just very little introduction, but we're going to start with Elena, who you have already met.
Hello again. I'm still Elena Quintana, and I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Public Safety and Social Justice at Harvard University. I direct the Institute in the name of addressing public safety challenges and social justice solutions. And that sounds maybe a little bit tricky, because usually people think that public safety and social justice don't necessarily go together, but we try to make that so. And so a lot of the work that we do is around, we do a lot of work with young people, including, have anybody heard of the Restorative Justice Hub? Yay, that is victory for us. And that there are a number of service providers that provide services to court and law youth. So we work with a network of creating a learning community with these hubs, create a database to provide evaluation and technical assistance and support for them, and as well as training and program development. So we're trying to build community capacity in many ways to work with court involved youth so that they can become incarcerated adults. So that's a huge focus of what we're doing. Additionally, I talked a little bit about the prison program, so we always look also at ways to change policy and practice, and so we have a number of pilots, even in Chicago, in the adult transition center, we have a similar peer-led trauma addressing program, utilizing a trauma program approach created by Sandra Bloom, a noted psychiatrist. So those are two pretty exciting things that we have going on, in addition to lots and lots of work in restorative justice, working with communities to build capacity to provide restorative justice, as well as providing evaluation for organizations that do restorative justice. And so all of those things are really done in the name of making our world more trauma-informed, as well as providing off-ramps to the school-to-prison pipeline. Everybody's heard of the school-to-prison pipeline. We really have invested a lot in creating that pipeline, and it's really important to build our architecture so people can get off of the school-to-prison pipeline and be back in the community. And I think that that's going to be a new frontier for all of us.
Thanks, Elena. Next up, we'll hear from Mark Hammer, who is a supervisor with the Alternative Prosecution and Sentencing Unit in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office.
Thank you. As was said, my title is the supervisor of the Alternative Prosecution and Sentencing Unit for the State's Attorney's Office, which means basically that my unit has responsibility for virtually any case that is prosecuted in a non-traditional way. So anything that's out of the ordinary comes our way. So we're involved in numerous levels of treatment, court intervention, diversion, whatever, to the extent at this point that we're talking about close to 4,000 cases in any given month. So it's a major undertaking at this point. It's become an enormous part of the State's Attorney's Office. Now, when Jessica and I were talking about this, and she told me I should kind of limit myself to about 10 minutes. People that know me and have heard me speak before know that 10 minutes is, I could talk for 45 minutes just about what our unit does, much less is that topic as broad as this. So what we decided was that I would focus the time that I have on one particular segment of the population that we work with, and that being veteran population. So I don't know, I know you guys have the slides in your handout, but, okay. So I thought maybe what we could do is just focus on this segment of the population and let that be the focus rather than me talking about the entire criminal justice population. So just to give you an idea of the existence, the number of people who are veterans, these slides, these first several slides come from an organization which is the Justice for Veterans organization, which is part of the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, which I have the great good fortune to work with pretty extensively, who are one of probably the leading experts in the criminal justice population as it pertains to veterans. So you can see that there are roughly 22 million veterans in the country, which sounds like a large number until you do the math, and it's somewhere around 6% of the population, which is a pretty small number when you think about it. When you think of, I would imagine that I asked people in the room, how many of you either are veterans or are related to a veteran or friends with, probably not many of us would have no contact with anybody who's been a veteran. But the actual veteran population is about 6% of the total population in the country. And you can see some of the other statistics, the number of people, these numbers are since 9/11 basically. So this is the number wounded and killed in activities around the world. And part of what feeds into the impact that we see in treatment with veterans is the warrior ethos, which is, you can see that on the left, the before basically relates to the mentality that exists in the military for individuals who are in active duty. I mean, they have a great sense of purpose, identity, morality, belonging, honor, sacrifice. One of the things that's not on there is mission. One of the things that they thrive upon, from my experience, is having a mission, what it is that they're supposed to be accomplishing. When they come out of service, and people who say they go back to civilian life, and that's not, from my experience with the veterans I know, that never happens. They never return to civilian life. They're never a civilian again. They're a veteran. And that has a very different implication to them than being a civilian. But what happens frequently is that this sense of self-determination and self-structure and being able to care for themselves interferes with their ability to seek treatment. It prevents them from seeking help, the military encourages them to just kind of suck it up and gut it out and make do on your own and not look for help. Suicide, unfortunately, is an incredibly sad statistic that has been talked about a lot in relation to veterans. And obviously, PTSD is a major contributor to this. In each and every day, on average, 22 veterans commit suicide. It's a staggering number of people. And you can see that also one of the numbers that's not on here, maybe on one of the later slides, but the VA has a crisis line, and they get, I'm thinking, like 10,000 calls a week, something like that, from veterans who are contemplating suicide. In terms of PTSD among veterans, you can see these numbers. I tend to think these numbers are a little low. I think they're actually probably higher than this. One of the things I'm going to mention in a couple of minutes is the impact of repeated deployments and how the current veterans are very different than past veterans. Military sexual trauma sounds like a very clinical statement. I can't imagine many things that are more traumatic or more trauma-laden than military sexual trauma. Basically what you're talking about is somebody who is being sexually assaulted and incurring all the incredible impact of that experience. But on top of it, you're layering on top of it the fact that this has occurred at the hands of somebody who not only is another human being, but somebody who is placed in this place right here to protect them. So you're talking about somebody who is a peer who has perpetrated this incredible assault on this individual, and so the lasting impact of that trauma and on trust and all the other things you can imagine is staggering. So another thing that's interesting in this slide is that in raw numbers, the number of men and women who are victims of military sexual assault are pretty much the same. Not in percentages, obviously, but 20% of women in the military report being victims of military sexual assault. A little over 1% of men, but because the number of men in the military is so much higher, the number of individuals actually comes out to be just numerically pretty close to the same. Okay, and then in terms of the things that are involved with the military service that can contribute to problems once somebody returns to the non-military life, multiple deployments. Just think about it. So these individuals who are going back repeatedly, when you go back to Vietnam or as far back as World War II, generally individuals in the military have one or two deployments. They may have done long deployments, but they were usually one or two. Nowadays, it's not uncommon for individuals to have 6, 8, 10 deployments. So they come back, they get some sense of stability, some sense of safety, and then they go back. And it repeats over and over again. And it seems pretty logical that would contribute to increased PTSD. Substance use and abuse, obviously there's a large number of individuals who are either wounded or receive some type of prescription medication in the military that is continued once they come back. For better or for worse, the VA eventually stops prescribing, And unfortunately, a high percentage of the prescription medication that individuals receive is narcotic-based painkillers, and individuals end up finding another cheaper way of using that, of filling that need. Quick turnaround time. My father was in World War II, and when they were finished overseas, they came back on a boat. And it took a month or so to get back, and they had a while to de-effect. Now you could literally be in combat, and then 6 hours later be in your community back at home, and vice versa. In no safe zone area, the fact that there's virtually no place that you can be in a military zone and be safe. You could be in a bathroom in the green zone in Baghdad and have just a reasonable chance of being blown up. The few basic types of treatment that the VA is using for PTSD with veterans: the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, DBT, prolonged exposure therapy, seeking safety, and CBT are all methods, all evidence-based practices that are used by the VA. Unfortunately, they tend to vary by location. Some VAs have all of these, some have one or two, so it really varies by the specific location. And then lastly, this is going through this quickly, I want to say just a few things about the Veterans Court system in Cook County and how the system works with veterans who are involved with the criminal justice system. Currently, there are 6 separate veterans courts. Basically, I don't know how much people have ever even heard of what treatment courts are, but treatment courts are basically for people who would be looking at prison time, if not for an alternative housed in treatment. So it involves extremely intense supervision, court-mandated treatment, close collaboration with the VA, probation, the judiciary, the prosecution and defense. At this point we were one of the first 10 jurisdictions in the country that had veterans courts. We now have 6, each suburban courthouse, and 26 in California has their own. The number of admissions and graduates, you can see. The impact is that there's a dramatic drop-off in criminal activity for individuals after they complete this program. You can see the numbers there. The cost savings are staggering, just based on the amount of time, the less amount of time that people spend in custody, not to mention the amount of time that people spend in the courtroom. Okay? As I warned, this is a fast overview. I'm perfectly happy to talk about this stuff in any other scenario as well. If people want to call, come visit Veterans Court. Another thing that we've done, last comment I'll make, is that I'm amazed that the system and my office, as prosecutors, have allowed us to dismiss cases only for people getting engaged in treatment. Not following through on it, just knowing what treatment is there, and I think that's been a massive change. So I think the system is looking to get help for people as much as they can. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, we have Bill Reich, who's a supervisor with the dual diagnosis unit at Logan Correctional Center.
Morning. So I am going to also try and breeze through this. I am Bill Reich. I work with Law Center over at Logan Correctional Center in Lincoln, Illinois. It is an all-female prison. Typically, when it comes to trauma and PTSD, offenders lack a lot of awareness, even if they've been diagnosed with PTSD. You might ask them, do you know what that is? And they're like, I don't know. I just know I've been diagnosed with it. So education is key, building that awareness to offenders. In terms of a diagnosis of PTSD, it's also important to help offenders recognize why they're being diagnosed with PTSD, not necessarily their history, but what it means and that there is actual treatment out there for PTSD. It's also important to assist offenders in understanding that they are not their diagnosis. I'm sure many of you have heard that before. It is also important to help them understand that it will be their responsibility to not only learn the coping skills given to them, but also to utilize those as well. Some curriculum for trauma and PTSD is seeking safety with
Stephanie Covington. We also have co-occurring disorders series with Katie Evans and Seeking Safety by Lisa Nazareth, Beyond Trauma by Stephanie Covington, and co-occurring disorders series by Katie Evans. All three can be utilized. They often all have the same concept, very trauma-informed, resiliency, coping skills, identifying safety, and also needing support. Some barriers to treatment. You have noise levels and acoustics within the prison environment. If any of you have ever stepped into a prison and actually gone into a housing unit, it's not as cozy as one might think in terms of the noise. It's very, very loud. The acoustics travel, if they travel. So even in a group space, it can be very difficult for every participant to be able to hear what's going on and what's being taught and the actual therapeutic process. The noise level also can affect the therapeutic process as a general whole. Hearing loud noises can affect individuals with PTSD and trauma. Hearing a gate shut is much louder than what it appears to be on TV, for instance. Resources. There's a big difference between treatment and security. In a prison setting, there's a big security issue. They want to protect everybody who's in the prison, but they also want to protect the individuals who work in the prison. And when I say they, I mean IDOC. So there's going to be things that are going to give us limitations as providers to bring into the prison setting in order to assist offenders with trauma and PTSD. Amount of staff, I'm sure many of you have heard this already. We're in the helping field. The more staff, the better, but there are limitations on that. Peer conflict, we have plenty of women who get involved in relationships, intimate, sexual. This can often lead to breakups and fighting. It can also develop them in having conflict with peers where one individual may be struggling with opening up about what has happened because they're afraid somebody else is going to share forth their information to another party. Again, going back to lack of education, this goes not only for offenders, but also staff members, counselors, and IDOC employees as a general whole. Just recently, IDOC implemented NAMI training for all IDOC employees and contractual workers, and NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Offenders have reported that barriers to treatment are things like the environment, which I had already mentioned, a wait list. Having a wait list can lead to time that individuals have to wait for treatment, which can be really difficult when they really want to be a part of treatment. Staff. Again, many correctional workers are going to be focused on the security aspect, so they may lack that awareness on PTSD and trauma. Movement. They also have restricted movement. I know that was already kind of keyed in today. Individuals will get tickets in the prison setting if they're in somebody else's room. So if they find somebody that they can really talk to and someone who will understand them, and they go into their room, they can actually be penalized for doing such when they might be gaining support from that individual. So that's something that can be a huge barrier for them. I also mentioned group space. Offenders have reported that as well. Other offenders, as a general whole, going back to the, the peer conflict as well as the fear, and limited counseling sessions, going back to staff, the amount of staff. Offenders have also mentioned that these are the characteristics that they look for in counselors. I'm sure many of you have already seen this type of panel per se of what individuals look for in a counselor, so I'm just going to breeze through that. When it comes to treatment, offenders have shared that these are the things that they want from their treatment when it comes to PTSD and trauma. They want to gain coping skills. They genuinely want to be taught these and be able to utilize them to the best of their ability in the prison setting. They want materials to read. Time goes by really slow in prison. It really does, especially when you are in your cell for 18 plus hours. They want feedback. They want feedback from their peers. They want feedback from the staff. They want feedback from the counselors. Individual and group therapy is what they are reporting they want. Support groups. Peer support groups is specific to trauma that they really have requested. To be treated as an individual, more counselors. To be able to see a doctor regularly. And also to have all employees, contractual,
state employees, all employees to understand trauma and PTSD, and inevitably smaller groups. The smaller, the better. So offenders have identified that the following things are things that have been able to assist them in gaining further direction and coping skills for their trauma and PTSD. When it comes to counselors, groups, packets, all that, I'm going to kind of leave that there. But when it comes to meditation, we have recently been able to implement yoga and also different imagery and breathing exercises into our curriculum that we've been able to do. It's limited though, because again, it goes back to that space that's available. Right now we're in a hallway when we do a group, so it's limited in terms of movement and being able to do yoga, but when we have a day room available, we take advantage of it. Again, seeking safety is something that they have mentioned health, art therapy, music, drawing, mandalas, those new adult coloring books that you probably have all seen around, a huge impact for the women. Journaling is also a huge impact for them. Medication, prayer, exercise. They also are limited to exercise, so they will often either go to yard when it's available or they'll walk up and down their hallway for further exercise. And last but not least, talking to someone and having that family support if they are blessed enough to have such. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Now we'll have a few more minutes from Eddie.
Hello again. Glad you guys are sticking around and none of you are actually falling asleep yet, so that's good. Good sign. So briefly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the YMCA and our approach to violence prevention. And while giving the opportunity to be up here, underscoring a few things that I think are extremely essential to the work that we do. So the YMCA is comprised of 22 YMCA centers. Typically, people will know the Y as fitness and swimming fitness. But actually, the YMCA is much more than that. We provide various type of human services, supports for our communities, and communities that are perhaps more impacted by violence and poverty. I have been entrusted to manage and direct our violence prevention. We work in 9 different communities in Chicago. I'm not going to mention all, but just to mention a few. South Chicago, which is the east side of Chicago, and as far north as Trumbull Park in the Logan Square community. So we work in the south side and predominantly in the west side as well. Last year we worked with about 420 youth. And what that means is that out of the 420 kids that we work with, we provide ongoing support. So this is not just a kind of one shot, you go in there for this and send you on your way. We provide intensive services from mentoring to court advocacy, to a number of other things that we provide. Some of the most highlighted programs that we've been able to create, I would say, is starting off with Bridging the Divide. In a nutshell, it's a project with the Chicago Police Department that brings together disconnected youth from our end and connecting them to law enforcement officers who have been trained around peace circles and mediation. The idea is that throughout the year, we provide these type of opportunities with the hope to better understand each other's perception. In other words, it's really similar to what we're doing today. It's about how do we humanize each other. How do our kids humanize police officers, particularly in light of what's going on in today's day? But also vice versa, how does law enforcement see our kids as for who they are and their potential? So a lot of that project is involved in our relationship and building these communities with each other. Another project that we've been working on is the RISE project, which is restorative individuals supporting everyone. And then it's diversion program. So kids who have a number of arrests between 2 and 7, typically for misdemeanor cases, CPD has a project or a program called the GIST. GIST actually assesses and then diverts a youth or a child, if they're willing to, remove that arrest into one of several providers. So YMCA happens to be the largest provider in terms of supporting these youth. Another project that we have is Story Squad. So we believe that, often kids that we talk about that are in the news, a lot of the cases for offenses that they might have created, media tends to create this narrative of them. And what Stubble Squad actually does is an opportunity to not only give them a set of skills through audio recording and sharing their stories and editing and putting music to their stories and sometimes even music, but it's also narrative therapy. So we focus on one particular event in their lives and we deconstruct that. The other project that I mentioned briefly is the Urban Warriors Program. I'm really glad of what Mark shared today, and I'm excited about reaching out to him afterwards because for us, it's about creating space for our kids to really process what they've gone through or going through. And physically, that's not necessarily seen through our communities. And so in this case, we leverage veterans and the empathy and sympathy that our community gives to them, especially in the last 20 years, in light of PTSD and how our communities are more informed around that to some degree at least. But we are leveraging veterans to really change the narrative of our kids. And we're doing so by training our veterans, connecting them with some of our youth, and providing a 16-week structured program. And then beyond that, providing support throughout the remaining months or years to come. This is something very novel on our end and something that we're continuing to hope to elevate and scale. We have great partners right now like the MacArthur Foundation, Cormac, and also within the veteran community, but also the University of Chicago being one of our research partners. And so lastly, the one thing that I want to mention is that as we're talking about issues around mass incarceration and so forth, 1/3 of our staff are actually people who have done time, who have family convictions. I think it's important to be inclusive around these issues, mainly because I strongly believe, and I've heard others say this, that the people who are closest to the problem are actually closest to the solution. And lastly, I just want to give a lot of credit to our leadership as well, because we've been able to build a leadership from different disciplines. So from having staff who are lawyers, to having staff who are social workers, to having degrees in public health, criminal justice, but also working closely with our learning evaluation and also our policy, which we do a lot of advocacy as well. So that's what I want to share.
Thank you, Eddie. So we have about 15 minutes for Q&A. Now, you probably noticed we've been webcasting today, right? So when you ask your question, you can ask it from your seat. Be loud enough that I can hear you. I will repeat your question so that the people on the other end of the webcast are able to hear it. So if you could also do me a favor and keep your question relatively brief so that I can repeat it or paraphrase it and stay true to your intention. Does anyone have any questions? Yes. Great. So that wasn't a question, it was a comment, information for everyone that Channel 11 is showing a documentary called Return about people returning from corrections and what that looks like and what happens. Yes? Great. So the question is about whether there's restorative justice work going on with adults. So Lena.
A lot of the things that you talked about are stuff that's been because now there's a huge focus on emerging work. And in fact, there we have determined a sort of support for to develop field, the most marginalized community. And so that is why we're looking at developing that right now, because we really want to build the capacity around that in order to actually make them decisions. That's the biggest way right now, but I would say all of the places that are doing further justice in some institutions really don't have anything about these types. So I think we're a tremendous opportunity to take the next result for that sort of the support building for the support that we're looking for.
So the question was, can PTSD be used in court as like a defense or, as part of the court proceedings? Mark, do you you can answer in a moment. Okay.
I recognize that the capacity for people that go to court that have been diagnosed with PTSD when they make recommendations around sentencing. So I think that there is a consideration and yes, the letter needs to be considered.
Yeah. Yeah, so the comment or question was just kind of generally encouraging us all to be thinking about the children of incarcerated parents.
I am really so excited about this. I think in Washington State that we have basically a law that any custodial parent who has been convicted of a certain level of offense, in order to not have active childhood experience of loss of a parent by going to prison, like that would be like a couple of cases right there. Any custodial parent who has been convicted of a certain level of offense is able to serve their citizens at home on monitoring with the conditions of that essentially around that they have to do things to their kids and then they have to have dinner together. So they need a number of conditions around that actually having citizens so we need to look for more trauma-informed that alternative that really is taking into consideration where the whole generation they want to try to get the sentence for
Yeah, so I don't think I can fully repeat that, but it was a story about a young person kind of making amends on behalf of his brother. Yes. let me repeat the question so the people in the room know. Sorry. I know it seems weird because they aren't in the room. So the question was basically, how does a case get to mental health court or drug court?
So we have to decide on that. But at the end, one of the things that our office has done is to establish what we call a laboratory initiative, where we treat every single case that comes through class or anywhere for eligibility for any type of alternative situation, whether it's a cure diversion or a treatment diversion. So we want to identify somebody and then collaborate with if somebody's a veteran, and it seems like they're eligible to collaborate with the VA. Somebody who's eligible for health work, we contact the community with the sheriff's mental advocacy unit. So we try to get people as soon as possible. What typically happens in most jurisdictions, and usually happens in Cook County, the people with language in the system for a long time, where somebody identifies them as a medical service. We try to identify them immediately, so that somebody could be the national standard, the gold standard, they have no one to fit in the international treatment work in the medicine. We're down to like 18 days, so we try to get people in as quickly as possible. But it can come from anywhere. It could be a courtroom that's required to have they have maybe a hospital that have to have them.
Thank you.
So this is a question I kind of want you to reflect on. So I think what's really promising about work around trauma is that it shows people our possibilities. You know, I think so often in criminal justice we reduce kind of bad behavior, like this is something inherent in a person's a bad person, we lock that person up, we have certain strategies around kind of bad people. So I think trauma shows, and you can, with brain scans can kind of show how the environment, interacts with a person. However, I think at the same time, seeing scans of brains, or even kind of, I think Lana's right to push back that it's not all about juveniles, but there's a way in which I think some of this work can lead to thinking about, there's this process early on in life that certain things get baked into a person. And so some of it is kind of the stuff that we see around criminal justice that reduces people to what they've done, thinks about people as like bad people or like inherently criminal or something like that. In some ways it can kind of, it seems like it defers it to adulthood in a way. So it's kind of a long, rambling question, but how do we, as a work around trauma, how do you push back on that? How do you keep trauma-informed care and responses, and I think an orientation and maybe kind of a way of thinking about everything from our culture to media, et cetera, about keeping open possibility for people? Does that make sense of the question? Or the two? When you see brains of kids, you're saying, here's how. So one thought you could have, I think it's pretty easy to have, is like, there's this period of time where things get baked into a person. And in a way in which can feel very deterministic and kind of have the same sort of dynamics that our normal way of thinking about kind of criminal justice can have.
I think the way I often hear this discussed is, how do you not convey the idea that trauma is destiny? I know. Does someone else want to respond before Elena? Because I know Elena will respond.
I guess it's not. And I can't help but kind of point them down, right? So if you look at 10, 15 years ago when seatbelts, for example, wasn't mandated, right? There was some research that was done about seatbelts as a safety issue, and you had instances like insurance companies pushing that because that would cost some X amount of money. The same can be said for, let's say, and focus like some of our facilities, especially like federal buildings and so forth. I think it's just a number of disciplines, right, to kind of look at the issue. So if I'm look at what I've been able to do as a life, it's like, well, how do I influence who I was involved in who can help me understand and who have perspective? I don't have to do somebody from a social perspective, right, and think about safety. How do I do something from a public background that can help me frame the issue more so like, this is the outcome of the or the public state money,
or even from a criminal justice background. And I think for me, part of it is like, well, yeah, all the time, you know, all the data, all the research, how do we get this thing? How do we use these platforms to help inform and educate others? How do you build coalitions with the idea of really changing the way we think about certain things? And I think that if we look at doing now, people tend to be more sympathetic with kids, right? So how do we translate that into the adults? Like I said just a moment ago in regards to the urban warriors program, I think the most creative thing, I mean, conditions program, I can't say it's a program, but I think the most creative thing about it is that we're bringing veterans who are constantly to be more patriotic or sympathetic towards group, and we leverage them to inform the larger public. And by doing so, then those people won't see this as actually by the headline news, but they'll better understand why the case acted the way it did. So similar to people with records, why are they offended? Why are they offended? And then maybe by doing so, we're going to have better understanding about historical processes where they're coming from. We'll have better understanding about history of trauma, and so on, right? But that would be really the opportunity that we have this conversation. Anyway, I don't know if I can answer the question, but I'm not sure if this is responsive to the question. One thing that we think is that there's limited evolving research regarding drug support. One of the two factors that we're talking about the indicator success of policy. So because of that, probably treatment now being required in most of the programs that are starting up as I was participating in acting about. So I think from my perspective, there are time research and money is the way to do this. So as jurisdiction requirement for funding, which you have to better work, you know, if they're going to get funding, they're going to have to treatment. The other thing that's kind of along with that is a practical way to say, this is what we know is working. If you want to get our money to do it, you've got to do it.
Great. So I am going to end with one final question so we can get out of here in time, and I want to end on a really positive note of how we can take advantage of opportunities and how we can make a difference in the system. So if I give each of the four of you a magic wand of trauma-informed policy and practice, you can answer really briefly thinking about what we've heard this morning. What one thing would you change about what's going on in our criminal justice system today? What one thing would you do differently, policy or practice? Go ahead, brief.
One thing I would say, we're talking about the distance, and I'm wondering more and more, how inclusive are we giving the people who are impacted by the disease to sit at the table and find solutions? It's a thing about living.
Great. Jill?
I have a question a little bit, the moral aspect of when it comes to getting access to others, support from one another, very good that peer-led, really helps us.
Thank you. Mark?
Anyway, in terms of treatment model, I would like to take it go further and further towards the beginning of the whole evolution of treatment model in terms of assuming that we experimental model, assuming that we need people with better rather than waiting for and processing somewhere, not only to get great treatment, but in anything that's doing it.
Next one.
I think that based on 80% of pregnancies that I have seen in the community, there are some people who are incarcerated, but that is impacting the community that incarceration.
So thank you so much to our panel.
I just wanted to thank our co-sponsors, Loyola and Adler, the presenters, the participants, the webinar participants. We covered a lot of information in a short time. It could be like a multi-day event if we really got into everything, but It is a very complicated issue, it's a pervasive issue, and I think maybe the first step is us talking about it, trying to get a better understanding in order to try to make some change. So there's all the materials from today will be posted on this website. Some are on there now, but by tomorrow it'll all be there. People feel free to share with people. And please complete the evaluations. There is a blue form that's just a real quick evaluation of the forum today, and there's also a green evaluation that's more about the authority's research. We would love your feedback. And the webinar participants can take these online. And the authority hopes to have more research forums, so if you could give us your ideas, we just might do another one. So thank you. Have a good day.